And welcome into the second edition of the Unpaid Interns. Austin Render now joined by Griffin Gonzalez. Griffin, welcome to the show. We're happy to have you, man.
Render, it's good to be here. Honored to be here. I love this project. Got to watch the last episode with Tamar. You guys killed it. But excited for today's show. I think we got some good guests coming in today.
Absolutely. Today we have on tap for you John Blau, who covers IU athletics for the Herald Times. He'll be joining us to talk a little IU football. And then Ben Ladner will be joining us. He is an IU graduate. He now covers the Atlanta Hawks for Sports Illustrated. So we have a good lineup here for you. But Griffin, we have some current events. This is kind of what we like to do here in the beginning of the show. We'll run through a couple of things that are going on right now. And let's start with the NFL because we haven't really touched on that in our shows yet. But the NFL is kind of planning on everything being virtual up to the training camp right now. That they don't feel like OTAs are realistically possible. And who knows, maybe training camp might not even be possible. But what do you make of almost the silence that we've gotten from the NFL in the past couple months in terms of really not even trying to make any contingency plans public right now?
I think that's actually the smartest thing to do on the NFL's part. And here's why. The NFL is not in season right now. And in fact, their season's not going to start until, September. And really their real interesting training schedule doesn't start when you're going to practice, actually going through plays. Doesn't start until late July, early August. So I think right now they're kind of playing, let's see what everyone else does first. The NBA, they still have a season to finish. The MLB has a season that was supposed to start that's going to be significantly reduced. You look at that, and I'm like, the NFL doesn't have to make a judgment right now. The teams that we actually need to know their contingency plan because it's going to change how we're going to see the next 2 months, what the next 2 to 3 months is going to look like, and arguably will alter the NFL schedule significantly based on TV viewership and all that. It's going to be interesting to see, and I think the NFL right now is just kind of pressing the brakes because they don't need a contingency plan out there right now. It's kind of like you don't need it. It's like the kid celebrating finishing his sophomore year with a bunch of seniors who just graduated. You got to wait.
Is that you?
That was not me. No, that was not me. If I was in Bloomington, maybe, but I'm not in Bloomington, so no. But I do think the NFL is waiting their turn. I don't know if there's this is the big thing with contingency plans, if I can throw it in there. There's not a right answer right now because we have no clue what's coming next. They're saying this is going to, come again in the fall in a wave. Some are saying that. So I think everyone's just kind of waiting for the latest information to come out, and they're going to wait till that last minute to make a contingency plan and bigger decision. I think the NFL has months to wait.
It's patience. I mean, I don't think there's any need to rush into it. It is interesting. Their draft is done. They did it all virtually, but because the NBA is stuck in the middle of their season, there's when are you going to have the NBA draft? What's going to happen to players like Justin Smith, who were planning on just testing the waters, and now they really don't have a whole lot. So there's a lot going on with the NBA, but the NFL has stayed relatively quiet. One of the things that has come out of the NFL here in the past couple of days is they have decided that they are now incentivizing the hiring of minorities for head coach and GM positions. And in a way, it's okay, good job. But as Mike Wilbon was saying on PTI, in another way, he said you can feel both things here. Okay, good job, you're doing this, but what took you so long? And it feels like this is well overdue for the NFL.
I have some ups and downs about this. I do think it is good that they are implementing that rule. I am for that 100%. But at the end of the day, I see the other side of the coin being, the jobs of the GM and the owners are to hire the most qualified candidates. And I'm not saying that some are not, some are, but we've seen coaches get hired that were not, no matter what their race was. And I think the rule should have been, hey, here's the deal. Every time you have a vacancy, you need to interview this many minorities. You need to interview this many people rather than hiring, because that's going to put a lot of pressure on owner and GMs to make decisions that they might feel is not in the best direction for them. There might be a coach that you want to hire for a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes, and that's going to be a very different coach than what you're going to want to hire for Phillip Rivers. It's no different there. And I think, owners and GMs with the draft choices and the penalties that they can incur, there's going to be some real rules there. And you saw players and athletes alike coming out and saying, this is dumb. Why are we doing this? This should be a given. This shouldn't be a reward. Mm-hmm. So I do think interviewing, having that record of who was interviewed for a position, and maybe make it private, give it to the NFL, your list, and proof that there was a meeting. But I do not think you need to make it, hey, you need to hire these people or we're going to penalize you. I think you need to make an effort to interview. I do agree. There is a huge lack of minority in the NFL as far as coaching and GMs and ownership goes. And it's, not the best thing in the world, but at the end of the day, their job is to hire the most qualified people. And there are people of minority who are more than qualified who have probably missed out on chances they have. But saying that we're going to reward, that's just the NFL putting too much pressure, I think. And I think there's a better way and more, I would say more appropriate way of handling it.
I think you put that perfectly. Nothing else to add on my part. I think that's great. It's like you said, it should be a given that this should be happening. This shouldn't be something where, okay, we're going to reward you for doing what you should be doing. So yeah, that's a good point. Let's go a little bit more local. Indianapolis, they signed they did a little bit in free agency, but it really was a relatively quiet offseason. You had Phillip Rivers, you had DeForest Buckner, but now Frank Reich is coming out and saying, we think that Phillip Rivers is more than a one-year guy. And everyone has kind of gotten the sense he signed the 1-year deal. This is kind of a 1-year practice. They signed Jacob Eason. It looks like that's where this team is going to go. What do you think, Griffin, about the addition of Phillip Rivers to this Colts offense?
I love Phillip Rivers. I will say one thing that concerned me is he didn't have a great year last year. And I think everyone kind of saw that. That was pretty public, that it was not a Phillip Rivers great year last year. That being said, I do think he has a lot of talent. I do think playing with a decent weapons around him offensively and at that line spot. I mean, this is going to be the best offensive line in the NFL most likely next year. I think that helps him in huge ways. My question is, they're thinking he's got more than 1 year. This year is going to have to prove that early on. I love Jacob Eason, but I think Eason's going to be a 2-year project. I think he's going to need a lot of work. I think he's going to need in-game reps, which is going to be really tough to come when you are playing on the same team with Phillip Rivers and Jacoby Brissett.
And you're on a team that wants to compete for championships. You're not just going to throw a rookie quarterback out there to get reps.
Exactly. And I mean, I think Jacoby Brissett is still a huge asset. The problem with Jacoby is the time to trade him was, about a year ago, when he started doing well and just tank, because now we have a situation in the NFL with all these rookie quarterbacks and all the free agency moves that the NFL for the first time in God knows how long has a surplus of quarterbacks, not a surplus of teams that needs them. So, I mean, we've been waiting for that. It seems like every year we're talking, well, which team needs a quarterback? And this year, no one does. And I think the Colts love Phillip Rivers. I think it should be interesting, but I think there comes a time where there's a kind of slight plateau followed by an immediate downfall, usually in quarterbacks' careers. We saw it with Peyton Manning. I think we're about to see it with Tom Brady, and I think
Brett Favre
first too, and that's my concern.
Yeah, he might be on that plateau right now, and then you worry about that sudden drop-off. You have to hope the weapons around him will be enough to keep the Colts alive. The Colts are a team that a lot of people like what they've done in the offseason, and they're starting to put them up as a contender with the Chiefs in the AFC. So we'll see. There's a lot to be determined in the NFL. There's a lot to be determined in football in general and in college football. So we are going to bring in our first guest of the day. It is the Herald Times beat writer for all IU sports. He really is focusing on football and basketball. Griffin works with him a little bit. So sorry, John, that you have to work with Griffin, but we're bringing in John Blau from the Herald Times. John, how are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you guys?
Oh, we're doing great. Griffin and I talking a little bit of football. Let's talk a little bit about your quarantine here, John. It has been a weird time for a lot of us. What's getting you through it? How's it been so far for you?
It's been fine. I mean, I watched a lot of movies, listened to a lot of music, do a lot of writing. Not doing any writing this week. Getting at furloughs employees once a month for a week. And so I think I told you this must be a very casual appearance because I'm not working this week. So
Yes,
it's very casual.
absolutely. We're very casual here on the unpaid interns. But what's getting you through in terms of, do you have a show, movies, music? What's getting you through the quarantine and keeping you busy?
I got Netflix, streaming again. I used to have like the DVD plan. I was one of those old school people that, there's more options with the DVDs, but I went back to actually the streaming service for the $9 a month. I got trapped into HBO Now for $15 a month accidentally. I thought it was going to be free. I think I messed up. But I was actually watching Netflix yesterday. I watched Molly's Game, which is about, I guess she was like a world-class skier. And then she became, she hosted these poker tournaments and stuff like that, got in a lot of trouble with the government, things like that. So interesting movies, I would say, is how I've mostly filled the time.
That HBO subscription's dangerous. I'm learning. I got it like at the quarantine, and like there's just one binge-worthy show after another. And I mean, not only a time thing, it's not the cheapest streaming service ever. So,
yeah, I mean, I heard that there was gonna be a free month or something like that, and so I got on for the free stuff, and then I accidentally ended up paying $15. So.
Well, you mentioned your music taste. I'm curious, what is the John Blau playlist look?
Ooh, good question.
It's a lot of stuff. It's all over the place. I was actually listening to a lot of Eminem lately. I don't know if that's bad to admit, but I mean, I grew up in the late '90s, early 2000s, and I was a football player, not a good football player, I must emphasize. And I was in the weight room, and we listened to a lot of that. I mean, I listen to all kinds of things, though. I mean, I listen to like a little Michael Bublé, a little musicals, a little, all over the place. Honestly, it's all over the place.
It's interesting. We go from Eminem to Michael Bublé a little too. I get that. The weight room stuff I do get because not that I have much football experience to be talking about, but when you work out in that weight room with those guys every summer, like the song I could keep coming to is it's a Rick Ross song called "The Devil Is a Lie," and it's just like burned in my memory from weight training. But you're right on that. Eminem does stick with you for life, I guess.
Yeah, and Purple Lamborghini, that's the song we're talking about. Rick Ross. Right. So yeah, I'm all over the range. You can't really pin me down, I don't think.
Well, how do you get creative as a writer, as someone who depends on sports happening right now? There are no sports happening right now. So how do you get creative in what you're doing right now?
I think there's always people, though. I mean, I think the main thing about sports writing is it's a genre. So I'm writing about people that happen to be doing athletic things. And so there's still people that are doing things. I mean, their routines and their lives are completely altered in, strange ways. I wrote the last week before I went into furlough, like Ernie Thompson was a former IU football player who left a year early, ended up graduating at the age of 50. What's that like to be graduating at 50 years old, Ernie Thompson, especially like during a pandemic when everything goes online at the end? How does that work out? I interviewed Low Price, who was the academic advisor for the men's and women's basketball teams. How do you adjust to a pandemic? And everybody is no longer in your office for tutoring sessions. They're how many thousands or hundreds of miles away, and trying to work that out. And so, yeah, there's things going on. I mean, I think at the very beginning, I wrote about the Spanish flu in 1918. I dug through a bunch of newspaper articles to see what that was like. How did athletics get affected by that outbreak? There's all kinds of things that you can find in terms of whatever's going on in the world with people. And it's definitely a strange time for people. So there's definitely plenty of stories out there.
What do you miss the most? I mean, we all miss sports, obviously, but what is that little thing that maybe you miss the most that is just not just generally sports, but something a little bit more specific?
I mean, in terms of work, I mean, if it's just one of those things, I mean, just being, able to interview an athlete in person and have an actual conversation. I mean, we have these Zoom calls where it's like one reporter at a time can ask a question, one person, then one person, then one person. It goes all over the place, and you can't just follow up. Oh, you said that one thing. What did you mean by that? It's kind of hard to do that right now. I mean, I miss that. I think I didn't appreciate that enough until you get to this type of situation. I miss going to the grocery store without a mask on. I mean, like all those kinds of things. I mean, I miss having movie nights with my friends. We get together, now I think we're going to try to do it via Zoom. I guess watch a movie at the same time via Zoom. I don't know how that works, but all those types of things.
I'm doing that. My girlfriend and I were in the middle of a series on Amazon Prime, so we're trying to watch it via Zoom together. It's not ideal, but it works. I can vouch for it. It does work. We've got Griffin here as the co-host, so I'm going to put you on the spot here, John. What is it like covering a sport with Griffin Gonzalez around?
I mean, it's fine. I mean, I don't find anything to be offensive about Griffin for the most part. A slap on the back every now and again. He's very excited to see you. He's a people person, from what I can tell, Griffin. I mean, that's nice. That's what he brings to the table.
What do you think about that answer, Griffin?
That's going to be the first line on my resume now. What is it like working with me? Quote, I mean, it's fine. John, that's going to be my first line. John, let me ask you this. This has kind of been a question that's been burning in my mind since this all happened. And you mentioned those Zoom press conferences. Do you see teams maybe choosing to do this just from a standpoint of time saving in the future of, hey, instead of doing, the 2-3 press conferences a week, we're going to do 2 in person, 1 on Zoom, or 1 on Zoom or 2 in Zoom and 1 in person. Do you see that being an issue in the future?
It's possible. I mean, I thought about that. There's obviously a convenience factor for the athletes and the coaches in terms of they don't have to get up and go to a location to talk to you. And the reporters don't have to get up and go to a location. You can literally not take a shower and sit in your living room and talk, but at the end of the day, I would hope that we get back to a point, like I said, where we're still right next to each other, having a conversation. There is that element it is different. I mean, it's just when you're in person with a person, you can kind of see their facial expressions a little better. You don't have to worry about whether the audio is cracking up, whether you can hear them or they can hear you, muting and unmuting, all those types of things. I mean, I could see it where in certain situations it might be helpful to do that, but I would hope that it doesn't become the norm, I guess, is at the end of the day.
Where have you been the most surprised through all this, whether it be like, wow, this interview went really well, I wasn't expecting it to go well, or, even just I was expecting more accent, or where, as a reporter, have you been the most surprised?
I think in terms of it's the question that Austin wrote, like, how do you get creative? How do you write? Like, what do you do? I think there was a fear when this first started that I don't have a plan, in terms of, I'm supposed to have this game and I write a preview that's kind of centered around that game. Then I write a game story, and then you have features and things like that. It was kind of hard to know if I was going to be able to get through the week, week to week to week. You felt like there was going to be a period of time where you ran out of stories. We thought we were maybe going to get to the end of May or beginning of May, and there's going to be like nothing to write about anymore. And I think I've been pleasantly surprised that stories keep popping up, things keep happening. And I think that just, again, proves like what I said, that, there's always things going on with people. And even when we're all sitting around in our living rooms, for the most part, not doing anything, there still are things going on. I think I've been surprised by that.
Well, let's talk a little IU football. I want to bring us back to first week of January. We're all in Jacksonville watching the Gator Bowl. What was it like to cover an event like that where this football team had one of its better seasons, 8 wins, they get to a Gator Bowl? I mean, that atmosphere was cool. I mean, what was it like as a reporter to be a part of something that was kind of special for that football team?
Yeah, it was interesting. So, I mean, obviously this was my first year covering the football program, and I had heard about bowl games in the past, and I think we heard about the Pinstripe Bowl, and you're out at Yankee Stadium and it's like an open air press box and it's cold as all heck. And I was hoping that wasn't going to happen. And then the Foster Farms Bowl, I think we heard about. Nobody goes to that one, so you didn't want to get that one either. And then we found out about this bowl, the Gator Bowl, and it was interesting because there was a ton of Tennessee fans down there. It was Florida, so it was warm, it was nice. I mean, there were days where actually, it was a little chilly. I thought it would be, 80s or something, but it was, 60s. But that was still fine. I mean, you get to go out to the practices. The venue where IU was practicing was like a high school field, but it was a really nice high school field. It happened to be, like an hour away. So you had to drive. I rented a Mustang for fun. I mean, that was interesting.
I forgot about that.
It was an interesting experience as a reporter. I mean, I hadn't done that before. And obviously the game was kind of crazy. Probably not crazy in the ways that IU fans wanted it to be at the end of the day. But it was still an interesting experience, and definitely something that I think the program wants to build upon, to be able to get to that type of bowl game and be as close as they were to winning it.
I'll never forget rolling up to the day before press conference, and Matt Cohen and I are getting out of my grandpa's 2003 Lexus, and then we see John Blau rolling up in a Mustang, gets out sunglasses. It was a different look for John Blau. I will say that. But John, let me ask you this: you look at this Indiana football team, you look at that Gator Bowl performance, and in many ways, for I would say the first 3.5 quarters of that ball game, it seemed that this was an IU football team that was not your father or grandfather's Indiana football team. Is Indiana still headed in that direction with guys leaving and coming in for next year?
Yeah, I mean, I think the at the end of the day, the performance was encouraging. This is a Tennessee. I mean, it's an SEC program, if you want to call it like blue blood or something, in terms of its reputation as a football program. It's not the Tennessee of old, but it's still Tennessee. The types of athletes they bring in are at a different level. And so that IU was able to be in the game and at times, win at the point of attack. The most impressive thing to me was the way the defense played for the majority of the game. Up front, I mean, not letting Tennessee for the most part, run all over them and stuff like that. That was impressive. That's more what I was concerned about, especially after that Purdue game. That was just absolutely just a track meet, a double overtime thriller. The way the defense played, and then offensively, that there were limitations, and I think there had been those, throughout the year, and so it wasn't consistent. But you hope with Michael Penix coming back and with more experience in that offensive line, you bring a healthy Stevie Scott to go along with Samson James. I think at the end of the day, like I said, just the fact that the athleticism, the level of talent on IU side of the ball didn't pale in comparison to Tennessee. I think was a huge thing. It's just, again, how it ended felt like, I know people like to, stereotype IU football in terms of always falling down or tripping themselves up. And to do it on that stage was a little painful, but I think for the kind of the majority of the season, it was encouraging that they didn't fall on their face for the most part. So I don't know. Again, I think just overall it was a pretty decent performance. And I think it's encouraging for the years going forward.
When you cover a team like IU football, who has the stereotype, I know this is just your first year, but you know the program. I mean, it has that stereotype of against the top teams, it crumbles late. When it happens again and again and again, look at Penn State, look at Michigan, look at Tennessee, how do you write something different? How do you find something else there and avoid falling into that? I'm going to write the same thing I just wrote for the last game because the same thing just happened again.
Well, I mean, I think the arc of the season, though, was a little different because, I mean, you did have the Nebraska game where they didn't fall on their face completely at the end. You did have the Purdue game where they did pull it out. So it wasn't like, at the end of the day, this is the team that just, couldn't get out of its own way. I mean, this is a team that actually did perform at times. It did show that they were taking a step forward in that way. But the Tennessee game, obviously, there's always different things that have happened in each that are unique that you're going to want to, figure out what happened. Like with the Penn State game, that fake snap that wasn't supposed to be a fake snap. Like what the heck happened there, and trying to find out, what they did wrong, but also what they did right in that game, where they almost, were able to kind of pull it out and make a statement, which would have been a huge statement on the road at Penn State in Beaver Stadium. That was an interesting, it's different than the onside kick that, you weren't expecting, and then kills you at the Tennessee game. So there's always a different element to each game and the arc of the season. And I think it's easy enough to do. I don't think it gets too bad. I mean, I can imagine in the past when it was every single time they fall on their face, it feels like that probably gets draining. But there was enough of the ups and downs and the differences in terms of how it actually worked itself out that it wasn't too bad. It's not too hard.
When you're writing a story, I think sometimes writers get this. Always, we love that underdog story, right? Even as readers of writers from Nationwide, we love that underdog story. Is it hard to not get caught up in that when you're covering the team week to week of IU football is on the rise? Is it hard to not write that dialogue? Is that a difficult thing as a writer, or trying to hold back from that and just be journalistically mild? Or is it tough when you're seeing a team go from 1-11 in a year to then growing and growing and growing and working their way up to an 8-win season?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a balance to be struck between, overplaying that part and trying to keep, a 1,000-foot view and make sure you're not just getting caught up in the moment, but then also just acknowledging what is true, which, like you said, going from 1-11 to 8 wins, I mean, that is a great step in the right direction. And then what they're saying in terms of how they feel about how that feels, I mean, that is real. I mean, you don't just completely discount that. But yeah, you do have to ask yourself that question. I mean, you have to maybe sometimes temper back what people are saying. It's like, well, but, this part, or well, but that. I mean, you do have to try to temper it a little bit. I think you do try to make sure you're not just, becoming a cheerleader or something like that. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, if you're good at your job, I think you're fair and balanced. You're gonna, again, it's about fair. I would say it's like what is fair, and it's like, is this enthusiasm fair? Is it not fair? A lot of times it is, but at the end of the day, you just ask yourself that question: is this fair? And usually you find the right spot. I mean, at the end of the day, I think a reporter will tell you, you want your team to win most of the time. I mean, it's easier to talk to athletes when they're happy and they've won. You're not rooting for them to lose, but at the same time, you can't be not doing your job and feeling bad for yourself if the team you're covering loses. So it's that little bit of detachment, but I do think it's dishonest to say, as a human being, you always want people you're talking to be happy. So, I mean, I would rather they win, but it's an interesting balance to strike. I think you do have to ask yourself and make sure you're not screwing that up.
We got about 2 minutes here. The schedule seems to set up okay for this team this year. Some good teams are coming to Bloomington. Maybe they could finally get that win. What do you see from this team maybe here in May in terms of expectation if the season were to happen as scheduled?
I mean, a lot of talent coming back. I think, what was it, Bill Connelly said from ESPN, I think they ranked 11th in returning production, both on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. So I think you expect, as long as strength and conditioning goes in the direction it should, as long as players are healthy, as long as players are getting better, that, a team that's returning that much production should be able to, I mean, they got in the top 25 at one point last season, to be threatening to be there. But there's a lot of variables, I guess, that make that possible or not possible. So, I mean, is Mike Penix going to stay healthy? Is the offensive line, are they going to figure out that interior of the offensive line, which they do have to fix that part, other than the other three that do come back, have more experience. Defensively, that's a lot of young talent there, especially Tywan Mullen, the linebackers. Defensive line even looks to have more depth than it did coming into the year. But at the end of the day, they can be better than the team versus Purdue that gave up long gashes in the run and in the pass. And so, I mean, there's a reason to be optimistic, but you can't get ahead of yourself, I guess. It's got to play itself out.
Well, thanks again, John, for joining us. Great analysis. And now we know what is on your playlist. Expect Griffin to be bumping that in the press box. If I know Griffin, he'll have that ready for you, I'm sure, as soon as you guys are able to get back to the football stadium. But Thanks for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your quarantine. Hopefully we'll see you soon.
All right. Thanks, guys.
See you, John. All right, Griff, good stuff there from John. What do you think about the football season in terms of its schedule? I mean, what are we looking at?
When I look at that IU football schedule, the first thing I see is that week 1 matchup versus Wisconsin. On the road, Friday night, national television. If there's going to be a huge upset to happen for IU, I think as far as nationwide recognition, the best time for it to happen would be Friday night against Wisconsin week 1. That's always college football's big night. That's their big party. That's one of their biggest games of the year usually. That's the one they get excited for since everyone's on, especially this year when everyone's going to be on pens and needles waiting for sports to return.
Imagine what Camp Randall is going to be like that opening day.
Hey, it might be the one stadium in the country I'll be happy to see at 50% capacity for week 1.
Ooh.
They need to do that. But, here's the thing. I think you have a very, very fantastic home football schedule for Indiana football. I think their toughest games you're going to see next year. You got Ohio State, Michigan, and on the road, which, usually you don't win those games anyway. But when you get Michigan State at home, that's a huge advantage. I think that could have been the difference maker in last year's game. You get teams like Illinois, talented, better, but not great. You get winnable games at home next year. I think all but Penn State is winnable at home next year.
I would even say Penn State's winnable. They almost beat them last year on the road.
And Penn State lost a lot of guys. So I do think, their home schedule is going to be the difference maker. If they can escape with wins over guys they know they can beat, the Marylands, the Rutgers, those kind of teams, and they need to win out their non-conference. They need to go undefeated.
Yeah.
If they do that, I think this is a possibly, not only a 7-win team. I think you got another 8-win team, possibly 9. Going into that bowl game, and dare I say, we could see a double-digit win football team next year.
Whoa!
I want to
be Griffin getting excited out here. We don't know. Maybe it won't even start on time. We're hopeful that there will be a football season, but that's still to be determined. You know what else is still to be determined, Griffin, is the NBA season. We're kind of in the middle of it right now. We've been on pause for a while. And in order to talk about that, we're bringing in the Hawks beat writer for Sports Illustrated. Ben Ladner is joining us here. Ben, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, guys. It's good to be here. Nice to see you again after what's been a little while.
It has been. I see that the beard is growing out. What has the quarantine been like for Ben Ladner?
It's been fairly uneventful, especially covering a sport that has now been basically canceled. It's been I've had to be a little more creative than usual, and it's been a little bit more. This is when the playoffs should be happening. This is the regular season should have wrapped up about a month ago. So all this stuff has kind of just been taken out of the schedule in an unforeseen way. So it's been a bit of a curveball, as I'm sure it's been for everyone. But at the same time, it's provided a nice opportunity to slow down, read more books, go for more runs. Something I don't really even particularly enjoy doing, but you have to kind of get sometimes.
That's fair. I love the background. It's a very nice background you've got going there.
Thank you.
And you're going to make me jump to the Jordan questions here. I know you watched the documentary. I'm assuming you watched it in full. What were your takeaways from that? Maybe some things that surprised you and just kind of your overall thoughts after watching it.
Yeah, it was a little heavy on the myth making. I thought there were parts of it that weren't entirely accurate. And if you go back and you look at what was actually happening during the time, or if there were a lot of people doing really good work, kind of giving some context and some background to what was going on, during the time the documentary spanned. And some of the stories, some of the anecdotes, the narratives that were driven weren't completely true. Some of them were outright untrue. But I think it never really purported to be like a capital J journalism type of documentary. So I did think it was a little, it was definitely slanted toward Jordan's point of view. I think that's kind of the compromise you make when Michael Jordan is one of the EPs on your documentary. It was much more of kind of a video memoir than it was a documentary. I thought it was still wildly entertaining. I still learned a good deal from it. It was interesting to see, and it was a hugely entertaining viewing experience. But I wouldn't call it necessarily the world's greatest documentary or anything like that. And the other thing too is like, I don't know what y'all thought, but I was a little surprised at how little practice and game footage there was. You would think, at least I did, that if they're following him around for an entire season with, unprecedented access and camera crews and all that, you'd see a little bit more in practice, a little bit more like up close in the game, hearing them talk on the bench and things like that. And we got a little bit of that, but for me, that was like the biggest thing I was looking forward to with the doc, is just seeing like the communication in the huddles, seeing the interactions during practice and things like that. And they didn't really go in that direction. It was much more leaned on kind of the sit down interviews and the B-roll and kind of the archival footage that they dug up.
I agree with Ben there. There was a lot of much to be desired there with this fact. Like, you think unprecedented access. I was like, so are we just, why even have interviews? Let's just roll it, Ben, let me ask you this. You cover the NBA today. You got to watch the documentary. And the big thing I'm seeing all over Twitter every single day, it felt like, with this documentary is, 90s basketball is 10 times tougher. I wish we could go back to that 90s era. Do we overplay the difficulty that Jordan had to play in compared to what today's basketball is like? And which one do you think is better or worse?
Well, to answer your first question, yes. I think you hear a lot. The biggest thing I think you hear is hand checking. They had hand checking back then. If Jordan played today when there's no hand checking, he'd average 45 points. If you can go back and show me like, on this play, this is where hand checking is really making a difference. Like, sure, maybe it adds 4, 5, 6 points per game to someone's scoring average. That's still a lot, but I think that idea of there was hand checking back then and not today, I think that gets overplayed. There are ways that you can compensate today for a lack of hand checking in a way that you couldn't back then, particularly in the form of illegal defense, there was illegal defense back then and there is not now. And B, I just think the impact of hand checking on the ball is just a little overblown. And it's not like LeBron James or James Harden or Kawhi Leonard would have a problem if someone's trying to hand check them. They would just go straight through them anyway. So that's one of them. The other thing, the question I would ask in response to all the stuff about the physicality and, today's league is soft and blah, 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 is, well, I would retort by saying they still had cheap fouls back then. It's not like you could just maul someone and get away with it. That's number one. And B, the big difference is really just if you did maul someone, you'd get a personal foul and not a flagrant foul. And the question I ask is, do we really miss that? Do we really miss putting the league's best players in danger and putting their careers in jeopardy by shoving them when they're in the air or clotheslining them when they're coming down the court? Like, is that really the thing that's missing from basketball today that makes it just unwatchable? I don't think so. And I'm someone who definitely prefers more of a skill-based game, more of a spacing-oriented style, kind of more like soccer than football, I guess, if you want to put it that way. And I guess for that reason, I would say today's game is better. But if you prefer 90s basketball or 80s basketball, the physicality, just the tight quarters, like get as close to the basket as you can and score, that's fine. I have nothing against people who prefer that. But I just think sometimes it gets overstated, the degree to which the physicality really has changed. The NBA is still a physical game today. And if you watch it up close, you understand that. And sure, it was probably more physical back then. And maybe we do miss a little bit of that. I do think that referees tend to be a little bit liberal in calling flagrant fouls and technical fouls and taunting and stuff like that. I do think the game could use a little bit more of that, but it's not like it's so diluted that every time you breathe on someone, you get called a foul, as a lot of, old school people on the internet might have you believe. So I think we saw in this doc, like the game is fairly similar in a lot of ways back then than it is today. There are key differences, of course, but I think just in terms of the movements and the man-to-man defense and the interaction between players, a lot of it has kind of stayed the same over the last 25 years.
Well, let's bring it back to today. Were you there? Was it March 10th? Man, that feels like forever ago. The last Hawks game, they brought in Vince Carter to get his 3-point shot. What do you remember from that day? I mean, a day that was just over 2 months ago and really feels like years ago.
Yeah, March 11th. That's I will never forget that day. It was the day after my birthday, and it was far more eventful than my birthday ever could have been. It was. Frankly, I don't remember much of the game from that night. The Hawks were playing the Knicks. It went to, I think, double overtime. And it was actually a really riveting game. Like if I had been watching the game, I would have been probably on the edge of my seat, because it was, from what I've heard, very exciting. And I remember Vince's shot at the end and kind of them putting him in and the fan reaction and everything. But everything from basically the third quarter when the news broke that, well, really when the whole thing started developing in Oklahoma City, I was kind of keyed into that because I felt like, okay, this could, hopefully this isn't what we think it is, but this could go really bad. And then of course it did. And from that point on, it was just like panic mode. It was total chaos on Media Row. It was all the fans in the arena, were on Twitter. They could check their phones and see. Even the players knew, like the coaches were telling the players, from the bench that, hey, Rudy Gobert tested positive, the season might be over. So everyone in the arena knew. And it was just a really, really crazy experience, just trying to kind of sort through what was happening, what it could mean, what it meant for the games being played now, the games that were scheduled to be played. And then obviously when Woj announces that the season's suspended, it's like, okay, what are the next steps? And where are we going to go from here? It was just a lot of questions, a lot of chaos that we still really haven't gotten answers to yet. But just that that initial blow of like, okay, this is happening. It was a little scary. It was a little uncertain, and it was completely chaotic.
Yeah, I mean, obviously none of us have any idea whatsoever when it's coming back. I'm sure I could ask you that question and you'd probably tell me what we got from Trisha yesterday about the MLB, and it's like, I don't know. But have you heard I guess this would be my question. Of the scenarios you've heard, what makes the most sense? What do you think is the most practical to get NBA back?
Yeah, it seems like the one that they're angling for, and the one that I think is probably the most practical, is basically forgoing the rest of the regular season. That they've talked about a play-in tournament for teams like the Pelicans and the Grizzlies and the Blazers, that sort of 8 through 10 bunch in the West, because they're kind of bunched up, all competing for that 8 seed. Right now, Memphis has it. And if you cut the regular season, you obviously get rid of that race. And that's a little unfair to those teams. But, this is an unprecedented time. That might be just the price you have to pay. I think the most likely outcome is that they just play the playoffs in the bubble location. They've been talking about Las Vegas and Disney World as kind of the two sites where they could kind of lock everyone in the premises. Adam Silver described it as like a campus feel, where you're sort of in this large premises. You have enough room to kind of move around and you don't feel like you're literally in quarantine, but you also are not going to be going out into the world and potentially getting other people sick and all that. The constant testing would obviously be a necessity, where every player, every team personnel would have to get tested before and after games. And the report was that they'd need about 15,000 COVID tests to make that happen, which is a lot. And apparently they've been assured that that's not going to take it away from anyone who really needs it, ordinary citizens like us. I hope that is the case, but I think that's probably the way they can. I don't see a scenario where they can really finish the regular season, or at least where it makes sense to finish the regular season. And, even in this situation, like the big question is what happens when someone tests positive? And like the way I look at it, I just think until a vaccine is created, the risk is always going to outweigh the reward. It'd be great to see how Milwaukee and Toronto or Boston would match up in an Eastern Conference Finals, or how the Lakers and Clippers would match up in an Eastern Conference Finals. And, what a finals matchup would look like between any of those teams. Can Giannis get his first title? Can LeBron get his fourth? Like all of these storylines, it would be great to get a conclusion to them. But when you consider what's going on in the entire world, the stakes at play of this pandemic, like determining an NBA champion falls very low on the priority list relative to everything else. So it just feels like it's not worth the risk of potentially, infecting 50, 100, 150 people and spreading this virus again, and potentially creating kind of a second wave of cases just to, finish the NBA regular season. And I say that as someone who loves the NBA, obviously, and like I said, would love to see this, conclude the way that it should. I just think, the public good has to come first here. And it's hard for me to see a situation where it's so essential that sports come back that we're going to create this additional risk that could endanger many people inside and outside the sports world.
Ben, let me ask you this. You've been talking about this, how they're going to open it up and what they're going to look like. My big question is big picture. Let's say you cancel the season and you're just done, like you just said. What's that going to do to player contracts? What's that going to make the future of the league look like? Because this is a decision that could affect, Paul George's decision or, Kawhi's decision to, we tried once and it didn't work. We only had 1 year to really experiment, where we were supposed to get 2 years. Is that going to change the landscape of free agency for the next years to come? Or do you think, they're going to be more forgiving to that?
Yeah, that's a huge question right now. The league is definitely going to experience a financial hit here, and that'll impact the salary cap. People, experts have projected that could go down as many as like $10 million in the coming summer, which is obviously a lot. And the biggest ramification that's going to have is for teams that, and because the tax and the cap are tied to one another. So if one drops, the other drops. So the biggest thing that's going to do is it's going to move the tax line kind of below where a lot of teams are sitting salary wise. So teams that weren't planning on paying a big tax bill are now going to be forced into paying one if they just kind of keep the system where it is and take the hit. One solution to that would just be to waive the tax for a year or to just keep it where it is so that you're not going to be hit and potentially have to break up a team just to shed salary and relieve your tax bill. But I think the other big question is how do you handle like a multi-year drop in the cap? Because obviously we know it's going to drop this year, but if things go back to normal in 2021, you could see the cap rise again. So you could have this almost double spike where it goes down from 115 million to 105 million and then back up to like 120 million, which that's, for people who don't know, that's kind of what allowed the Warriors to sign Kevin Durant in the 2016 summer, because the cap went up by like $20 million. And so all of a sudden they had this extra space that they wouldn't have had that allowed them to sign Kevin Durant to a max contract. So to me, like the league will and should see this coming. And I think the solution is just to smooth the cap. Whatever the differences would be from year to year, you kind of spread that out artificially over several years. But you mentioned the teams like the Clippers, teams like the Lakers, I think you could even include here, where like they really have kind of a short window here. Like LeBron is aging, Kawhi and Paul George are only under contract for a couple years unless they re-sign. Even the Bucks, Giannis is going to become a free agent soon. Maybe he stays in Milwaukee, but if he doesn't, this is a year that you're missing. So there are a lot of teams whose windows were already kind of slim and now are becoming even tighter and are missing out on basically a prime year of a generational star or two that is now basically just going to waste. And I don't know what the solution is to that. You can't like de-age LeBron James. You can't make these guys age in reverse. Like you can kind of solve the cap stuff, but as far as the personal stakes with each individual player, that's a much harder thing to figure out.
I think we need to work on the de-aging of LeBron. Let's get to work on that. Everyone,
he may have already figured it out, man. I mean, that guy, it seems like he's never going to drop off.
Okay, before we let you go, Ben, this is year one in the books, I guess, kind of for you with the Hawks. What player maybe that you got to talk to in the locker room, what moment kind of made it hit you like, okay, I'm covering the Hawks. This is pretty cool. Like, I know you had Vince Carter on your team this year, but like, what was the player you got to talk to where you're like, all right, this is cool. I'm in the big leagues now.
Yeah, well, one example it actually is Vince, where the first basketball game I ever watched in my entire life, I was like sitting on my dad's knee when I was like a month old, 2 months old, and it was Vince Carter playing in the Final Four for North Carolina. And then this past season, I interviewed him like after practice or whatever. And he's for people who don't know, he is expansive. He is, he goes in depth on his answers, and he'll give you a lot to work with. So I ended up talking to him for 10 or 15 minutes, just one-on-one kind of after practice on the side of the court. And he's a really nice guy. And B, that was a moment where I was thinking like, okay, this is a future Hall of Famer, a guy that I grew up watching and was kind of helped initiate me into the world of basketball in a way. And now I'm covering him. Now I'm like, watching him up close. I'm kind of covering the day-to-day of his career. So that was a really interesting kind of, I don't know that any moment was surreal necessarily, but that was probably as close as it came to kind of a, like, whoa, I'm really here type of moment.
Well, you've got a lot on your hands right now in terms of the NBA. Who knows what's going to happen? The Hawks season might be done. I mean, there's certainly the chance,
Yeah,
like you
I'm
said.
certainly operating on that premise.
Yeah.
I've finished up basically all of my season review stuff. So if the season's not over, that's gonna throw me a curveball.
Well, thanks for joining us, Ben. Stay healthy, stay safe. We'll talk soon, but enjoy the rest of your break.
Yeah, thanks. You too. Thanks for having me on.
All right, Griff, some good guests today. Ben Ladner, John Blau. We talked some football. We talked some basketball. Any overall takeaways from what we heard from the two guests today?
First, John Blau sounds like he's gearing up for football season. It sounds like he's ready to get back to work.
He's ready to work with you again.
Yeah, I think he doesn't even care about any football. I think he just wants to sit in the press box again. Yeah. No,
especially if you play Eminem.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the best part of the combo. We got Blau's playlist. I've been wondering that for years. But no, I think he's very promising about Indiana football. I think, there was a fear with how that game finished against Tennessee that this is the same old Indiana football, just, a remix. And I think John Blau is disagreeing with that. As far as Ben Ladner goes, man, he has one of the highest basketball IQs I know. His ability to talk the game and be able to write about it so effectively is amazing. And I love it for how young he is too. It's unbelievable. I loved having him on, love hearing his insight. He sounds mixed. I don't think the NBA really knows. I hope they know soon. But I do think that kind of playoff in a locked location would be interesting to see. The question is, are players going to quarantine? You're going to get however many players on 16 different teams to quarantine, for 2 weeks till the start. And you're going to get their families to quarantine.
I was going to say, are their wives invited? Are their kids invited? I mean,
and, do you make it optional? Like, hey, if you don't want to leave your family right now, because some people might not want to leave their wife and kids in the middle of a pandemic. Are you willing to leave them to, play a playoff games?
And are they best of 3, best of 5, best of 7? I mean, Adam Silver has said he wants to keep it best of 7, but I don't know if that's possible.
I think you can do a series by series basis. I don't think your 1 versus 8 seed needs to be a best of 7.
Yeah.
Very rarely is that ever even a best of 5. I do think, I think your most interesting ones you need to keep best of 7 are the 3, 6, and 4, 5. Those are usually pretty tight, so especially in the Eastern Conference where,
But I don't think you could do round 1 where the 1 and the 8 play a best of 5 and the 4 and the 5 play a best of 7.
Yeah.
I think you could change it round by round, but in the same round, I think it's got to be the same number.
Yeah. I'd be interested to see how they do it. I think I love what Ben Ladner said. He said it best. I mean, is the risk versus, worth this little reward? And for a team like the Milwaukee Bucks, where this might be their one window, it might be worth it. But for a team like you said, the Pelicans, who are at the 8th seed in the West, who have a healthy Zion Williamson right now and would be healthy for next year, might not be worth it. I'll be interested to see how they do it. I'll be interested to see if they give players the option. If they don't feel safe doing it, do they have to participate? Are they going to be penalized for not participating? These are the kind of issues that bringing sports back, it's not just as easy as, oh, hey, here we are. I mean, the amount of money that TNT and ESPN have already lost on the TV contracts, how do you go about redoing that? And the fight between who's going to get what, because you probably don't want 2 networks fighting for locations when you have one location.
If they do 2 locations, it could work. But if they're just stuck in Disney World, I mean, how the heck are you? There's no way they're going to take 2 camera crews, 2 announcing crews, 2 producing crews. No way.
We're just going to get an NBA TV playoffs. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
Hope you got your cable bill this month.
Well, good insight from all those guys. I agree with John Blau. I almost think it could be motivation that Indiana lost the way they did. Obviously, you don't want to lose that game, but it's like I know they've lost a lot on a quote unquote national stage, but that was a standalone SEC opponent national stage. That wasn't 3:30 on ABC against Penn State when you have 20 other games going that people could be watching. This is literally the only game going on right now against a powerhouse like Tennessee, and everybody's watching you. Everybody. So I think that was a big stage for them to have that happen. And I think it probably hit harder than just a Big Ten afternoon game on a Saturday against Michigan where they blow a lead and lose by 20.
And I think the other thing is, you say how that hit harder, but at the same time, the nation was kind of woken up like, this is not Indiana football.
Oh, yeah.
Indiana used to be in the same boat as Rutgers, and at that game, they're putting Indiana in the sweet level of the Carnival Cruise Line. So
yeah.
So I think that was a big yes. If you I think you lose, it stinks, but if you have to lose, that's the way you're going to go. And I think it's a bummer for those of us who have been watching IU football for 20 years of my life and have seen this play.
Me too.
But I do think you can't deny, you can't watch that game, rewatch it. I dare you at home.
Nope.
Watch it. You can't watch it and say, damn, this is a different team. And watch a 2008 Indiana football game and then watch this and tell me
watch the Insight Bowl and then watch the Gator Bowl.
Insight Bowl, the Pinstripe Bowl was actually.
Pinstripe, they were competitive, but that was a bottom tier ACC team.
Pinstripe Bowl is one of the most exciting offensive football games.
That was a crazy game.
Oh, so fun.
All right, before we go, I'm going to ask you you're in Carmel right now. You've been in Florida a little bit. I'm in Fort Wayne. I've been in Fort Wayne a little bit. What do you miss most about Bloomington? What do you miss most about IU? I know all of us are having Bloomington withdrawal right now, but if there's one thing that you really, really want to go do in Bloomington right now, what is it?
That's so tough, man.
I know. I'm putting you on the spot. It was in the script, so you needed to be ready, but I'm putting you on the spot.
Well, for dramatic effect, I have to say it.
So
yeah. Whether here's the thing. I think the big thing I miss about Bloomington is walking around campus, seeing that, walking downtown Bloomington every day. I got to go to my apartment last week to grab some stuff, and just walking around Bloomington was beautiful. It was nice. It was kind of refreshing. Now that businesses are open up in Bloomington, man, I'd love to go sit in Nick's. I want to go sit.
Yeah.
Nick's. I want to go sit in a booth. I just want to back to back to back. I'd like to go to Nick's. I'd like to go to Trojan Horse, and I'd like to go to Buffalo's, just in one meal.
We're gonna go back to Bloomington, and we're just gonna go on a local restaurant parade.
Oh my god, yeah! Can we
let's do it.
Just catering at 5 different places for a week.
We'll go grab a camera from the media school, and we'll film all of it.
Yeah, Alan will probably be down for that. But no, I think the thing I miss about Bloomington is definitely local businesses, restaurants. But walking around that campus, man, it's that's the one thing people love about IU is how beautiful the campus is. Well, one of many things I should say people love about IU, but getting to walk that every day is something I've really never taken lightly.
Yeah.
So that's the one thing I really miss.
I'm going to be cliche. I miss the people. I miss going into Franklin Hall every day, and you never know who you're going to see in the lobby and in the chairs. Usually Matt Cohen, but you never know. And that's what's great is you can talk to all different people every day. You can see people doing a podcast and make funny faces at them as they sit in there and try and focus while you walk by. You've got people like me sitting in the checkout studio just waiting for people to come around the corner and come talk to me. And I mean, that's the type of stuff I just miss, having the people around, covering an IU basketball game and chilling on Media Row with some of my friends. I've always said to myself, do not take going into Assembly Hall 20 times a year for granted. And I don't, but I just miss that so much right now. Just like I would die. And I know the basketball season was over in terms of home games, but I would die to go right back to Assembly Hall, get to cover, even if it's just Southern Illinois coming to town, just to get back in the Assembly Hall would be fun. But I think we all have a laundry list of things we're looking forward to do when it all opens up. And for now, we will meet virtually, talk to great guests like John Blau, Ben Ladner, thanks to Trisha Whitaker and Dustin Toporek from last week. And I mean, that's all we can do right now is just try and have some virtual company between each other. So thanks, Griffin, for stepping in as our co-host today. You'll see Griffin throughout the summer. You haven't seen Connor Hines yet. He will be with us eventually, but it'll be Tamar and myself, joined by Alex Rich tomorrow on Friday. He has some great stories from his Indiana baseball days with Kyle Schwarber. Apparently, he's going to have his guitar with him, so he's going to sing us some songs. We're going to talk about our favorite music from the quarantine, what's getting us through, what's not getting us through. So we'll talk about all that on Friday. So again, thanks to John and Ben for joining us. Thanks to Griffin for co-hosting with me. For Griffin, John, and Ben, I'm Austin Render saying so long from Unpaid Interns.